As I mentioned in my last video, I'm about 3 weeks into the Rebuilding Glory campaign so far, and the fighting has gotten super crazy. It's been a ton of fun though. In this video, I'm going to talk about the PvP metagame as far as evil side commanders go, in my opinion. So if you want to stay one step ahead of the competition, stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. Let's start things off by talking about the evil side tier 3 commanders that I have seen people be most successful with, to the surprise of exactly nobody, is the Witch King. This guy is still an absolute monster. He has incredible damage in the early rounds thanks to a combination of Black Captain, Convener, and Ringwraith paired up with Alchemists, which already do an incredible amount of damage on their own. This guy just takes them to that next level, dealing absurd amounts of burn damage in the early rounds. He has fallen off a bit in popularity, in my opinion, because more and more people are running things like Blinding Barrier, Dwellings with Fire Resistance, tons of White Council High Alert commanders out there, and things like that. But when this guy hits a target that is not prepared for it, he absolutely obliterates them. I think probably, in my opinion, the strongest commander right now, if we are going to take Suni out, or Sunind, however you say her name, the new commander that just got released. If we're taking Sunind out of the conversation because she's so new, I think the strongest commander currently for evil side is actually Sauron. I have seen some extremely impressive results this season from focus damaged based Saurons. This does require a higher level of gear, but more and more people are opting out of Ring of Terror because so many people these days are running Madness Immunity helmets to get around Ring of Terror, and I think that's going to increase even more now that Isildur is out, and he has this exact ability as well. But I've seen a lot of people putting points into all of Sauron's various focus damaging abilities, plus he has Gorathor that makes enemies take increased focus damage. He has a good amount of natural focus on his own as well, and he can crank out a pretty substantial amount of focus damage on his own. And when paired with Evil Men units, his army can completely dodge things like Champion of the Light. Because of the rise in popularity of Sauron and this focus damage build, I've seen a bunch of people starting to run focus protection quilted armors. As far as the newcomer to the scene, Sunind is pretty ridiculous. I've seen some absurd reports out of her because this thing right here says orcs deal, and this goes up to 30%. 30% more damage for each allied evil men unit present. And what people do is they run a small amount of halberdiers, a small amount of dragoons, and then an absurd amount of arbalests, which gives those arbalests a bonus of 60% damage, which is completely insane. And she has inspiration, which is another damage boost during the early rounds. So you'll see things like arbalests with a crazy amount of plus attack thanks to the gigantic hammer, and then also dealing plus 90% damage during the early rounds of combat, and those guys just shred everything in sight. I do think that they're going to have to balance her out because, I mean, I don't want to be biased. Like, I know people are going to say, oh, every time an evil commander is good, you have to nerf it. But if we're being honest, plus 90% damage in the early rounds, and then plus 60% damage for the entirety of combat, no other commander in the game comes even close to that. I mean, the only thing would be Witch King with Alchemists, but there's a bajillion counters to Witch King and Alchemists, including things like High Alert, Blinding Barrier, Burnt Damage, Chess Piece, and things like that. I mean, pretty much all you can do against this is Like, hope you have Eomer's unique, I guess, or hope your army is Isildur with a ridiculous amount of Dunedain. So I don't want to throw her into the mix yet, both because not a ton of people have her, as she is a very new tier 3 commander, but also I do think they're going to have to change something about her. As far as tier 2 evil commanders go, I'm not really sure where to go with this one. Lurtz was insanely popular in the first couple of seasons. I haven't really seen that many Lurtz these days, and I think it's because he doesn't scale particularly well with high levels of respect. He kind of just runs out of great skills to take. Kamul really falls off as well. This guy is quite solid in season 1. He's okay in season 2, but again, he just sort of runs out of skill points to take. I will mention that I believe more and more people have been experimenting with Mouth of Sauron, using things like Harbinger of Darkness to kind of stall out the first few rounds against Gil-galad, and then including a bunch of Reapers in their army, because Gil-galad tends to run at least 2 ranged units. And so with Harbinger of Darkness, you can basically get around the evasion rounds from Gil-galad, and then when the evasion is gone, then you can start doing damage to him, because your units dealing less damage doesn't really matter in the early rounds if they're not going to hit their target anyway, and this is going to reduce the damage you take as well. At least reduce the damage you take from enemy units as well. And this way, you don't have to have a source of pursuit in order to combat Gil-galad, because pursuit is something that evil factions tend to have a more difficult time obtaining than good side factions. But as always, the problem with Mouth of Sauron is that he's kind of hit or miss. If he runs into like a Gimli or a Legolas, he's just kind of dead. Because, I guess I'll pull his skill tree back up here, Messenger only affects normal attack damage. It does not affect skill-based damage, and most commanders do most of their damage. I shouldn't have used Legolas as an example, because he does do a lot from normal attacks. Generally speaking, commanders like Dwalin, Gimli, Dane, the traditional damage-dealing commanders, they don't really care about their normal attacks that much. They do most of their damage through skills, so Mouth of Sauron can be a bit hit or miss. I do think that Gothmog is always going to be good because he is so flexible. This guy can run Reapers, he can run Arbalests, he can do insane amount of siege damage, he can run Alchemists with the Crippled. There's just a lot of very good ways of building Gothmog. So I do think that he'll always have a place in the meta, and if I had to pick a second commander, as far as evil factions go, I would choose him. His big weakness, though, is that he does tend to suffer against all of the White Council commanders, which are very, very popular for good side factions. I really think that evil needs a better tier 2 evil commander. And Thanatos would troll me endlessly if I did not point out Sigrid. This guy can do quite a whopping amount of commander damage on his own, and he is particularly good against mounted units. However, with the way the metagame has been shifting, I'm seeing more and more people move away from mounted units and back towards elves and ranged units. And finally, they'll wrap things up talking about the tier 1. Tier 1 for evil, in my opinion, is very straightforward as far as who sees success. You have Khaldun. This guy is one of the best commanders in the game, in my opinion, thanks to an absurd amount of damage mitigation, as well as travel tactics, giving evil men follow-up. He's extremely good, very annoying to deal with as well. You also have a rise in popularity of Usra because of her twin daggers. These things essentially give your army Convener for the first 3 rounds. You don't get the initiative that Convener provides, but you do gain follow-up in those early rounds, and this weapon has nice stats as well as army attack. However, her skill tree is, in my opinion, significantly worse than Khaldun's skill tree because Warband Leader is just kind of dead as far as PvP goes. And a special shout out to Grima, who has always been one of my favorite commanders in the game. Grima has a pretty respectable unique, and this lets you activate Wormtongue on round 1, so you can actually hit the enemy commander with Madness on round 1. Normally that doesn't happen until round 3. That can be very impactful against the correct commanders. He also has Survivor as well as Prudence, so he can sort of kind of wait out the early rounds against Gil-galad, just not to the same extent that Mouth of Sauron, who basically turns off unit damage, can wait out those rounds. But the combination of early round avoidance plus late round damage reduction plus the best Madness kit in the game, in my opinion, makes him a pretty solid overall commander, especially out of a T1 commander. So if the enemy's not prepared to deal with what Grima is bringing, this guy can do a shocking amount of damage for a lowly quote-unquote tier 1 commander. All right, guys, that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it and learned something useful. Catch you next one. Phoenix, over and out.